Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Syrian army defectors attack a military base as Assad faces growing isolation. Yemenis urge the Arab League to suspend their country's membership. And thousands storm Kuwait's parliament, demanding the resignation of the prime minister. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
The deadline given to the Syrian regime expires today, and the country's membership in the Arab League is effectively frozen in accordance with the decision taken by the League on Saturday. This comes after a meeting of Arab foreign ministers was held. It started this evening in Rabat on the sidelines of the Turkish-Arab Cooperation Forum.
The Arab ministers who were snubbed by the Syrian foreign minister will discuss a memorandum of understanding based on a report that will be presented by the League's Secretary General Nabil al-Arabi. It will include a presentation on measures to protect the Syrian people. In addition, he will present the outcome of his meetings with different Syrian opposition groups.
Arab League sources said the League is ready to immediately send 500 media representatives and civilian and military observers if the Syrian regime guarantees their safety and freedom of movement and residence. The sources added that if the regime agrees to the Memorandum of Understanding, the Arab Initiative would have paved the road to the solution. If the regime does not agree, it would have prevented it once again.
On the ground, 20 citizens were killed by the gunfire of al-Assad's brigades in Idlib and Homs as army defectors attacked the headquarters of an Air Force intelligence base in the city of Harasta in the countryside of Damascus. And while opposition activists burned Hezbollah flags, supporters of the Syrian president attacked the embassies of Qatar, Morocco, and the United Arab Emirates in the capital Damascus.
The Wednesday of National Fraternity is yet another day in Syria, during which the peaceful popular resistance continues alongside the consistent violence and killing carried out by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's brigades. Here, the victim is Faisal Mahmoud Lifloh, only 17 years old. He was hit by different weapons and subsequently perished. And here, another victim on whose body martial arts were practiced, also leading to his death. The number of killed, injured, and arrested is increasing as popular demonstrations also increase. In Homs, Hama, Damascus and its neighborhoods, Daraa, and other Syrian cities, massive protests were held to demand the downfall of the Syrian regime amid heavy gunfire by al-Assad's brigades and the Shabiha. This comes as a number of cities went on a general strike, notably the cities of Hama and Daraa. The Shabiha carried out arrest campaigns and attacks in Syrian cities and universities, especially in the University of Kalamoun. Al-Assad's brigades and supporters were not satisfied with killing innocent people, so they threw stones at the embassies of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Morocco. They also wrote slogans on the embassy's walls, hours after the Arab League decided to freeze Syria's membership. Two individuals residing near the UAE embassy building in the upscale neighborhood of Abu Rammana, located by al-Assad's home and office, said some slogans accused the embassy of working for Israel. Amid these attacks, the demonstrators expressed a notable position by chanting a song that speaks about the difficulty of their situation. However, they did so in their own way. On the other hand, Syrian activists said al-Assad's brigades killed a number of Syrians in an ambush in the city of Hama after activists indicated that army defectors attacked an intelligence base near the capital Damascus.
There is no God but God the unique. He fulfilled his promise and made victorious his worshipper, and made mighty his soldiers and defeated the Confederates.
This is the first attack that targets a main security institution since the protest movement against the regime of President Bashar al-Assad was ignited 8 months ago. Meanwhile, the regime's supporters held demonstrations in Latakia and Damascus. It is worth mentioning many Hezbollah flags were raised. Anti-regime protesters held night marches that swept the streets of Syrian cities and villages, while some burned the flag of Hezbollah and condemned Iranian interference in their country.
تظاهر مئات الآلاف من معارضي النظام اليمني في العاصمة صنعاء.
Hundreds of thousands protested against the Yemeni regime in the capital, Sana'a, and a number of cities, demanding a freeze of Yemen's membership to the Arab League due to what they referred to as the regime's continued killing of civilians and protesters. Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh met with the UN Secretary-General's envoy to Yemen, Jamal bin Omar, to discuss the developments of the situation, efforts to contain its ramifications, and the implementation of the Gulf Initiative and the UN Resolution 2014. Anti-Saleh protests continued, and protesters repeated their demands to arrest and try Saleh.
At last, the Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh is meeting with the UN envoy to his country, Jamal bin Omar. This is the first meeting between the two men and comes after bin Omar's 6 trips between New York and Sana'a to meet with all parties in the Yemeni crisis. وكالة الأنباء اليمنية الرسمية سبأ قالت إن صالح جدد
The Yemeni state agency Sabah said that during the meeting, Saleh reaffirmed his party's readiness to sit down with the opposition parties to complete the dialogue on the Gulf Initiative's implementation mechanism as soon as possible. Once the mechanism is agreed upon, the final signing of the initiative will take place, along with implementing its articles about a peaceful power transfer and conducting early presidential elections on a schedule agreed upon by all parties. However, the opposition parties preceded Saleh's statement and reiterated through the chairman of the Yemen's National Council of Revolutionary Forces, Mohammed Salem Basinjwa, that the Yemeni president should sign the Gulf Initiative before talking about what Saleh describes as a timetable. In addition, Basinjwa stressed in media statements that there can be no transition to any mechanism if Saleh does not first sign the initiative. So, the Yemeni crisis still oscillates between initiatives and regional and international mediations, and the popular uprising that rejects any dialogue or settlement with Saleh's regime. But the political opposition believes that the political solution will save the uprising and achieve its demands.
We can only speak alongside the goals that they're calling for. With our political work, we can provide a better atmosphere for the success of their revolution and for them to achieve their aspired goals.
The protests that are still flooding a number of cities in the country announced their refusal to give President Saleh any immunity from legal prosecution. The protesters renewed their demand to issue international arrest warrants for Saleh, his relatives and associates in the government, and hand them over to justice. However, legal experts believe that President Saleh will be able to avoid that from happening to some degree.
Even we will not close the door to hope regarding this issue. If President Saleh and those with him return to reason, then there's a possibility it can be solved. However, the original issue will remain, which is the bloodshed of the martyrs. They should be satisfied with the justice of the transition.
Anwar Al-Ansi, BBC.
In Kuwait, thousands of people have stormed parliament after police and security forces beat up protesters outside the prime minister's home. An opposition lawmaker says protesters had staged a march outside Premier Nasser Mohammed Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah's home, demanding his resignation. Police used batons to disperse the demonstrators. Witnesses say at least 5 people were injured. Protesters have called for the dissolution of parliament over alleged corruption. Kuwait's premier has been under fire for failing to deal with a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal involving 16 lawmakers. It is also alleged that he ordered the transfer of millions of dollars from public funds to private accounts abroad. To discuss that a bit further, we're joined by Syed Ali Wasif, who is with the Society for International Reforms and Research, who now joins us on the line from Washington. Mr. Wasif, thank you very much for joining us here on Press TV. Now, you know, Kuwaiti officials have for a while been under pressure by average Kuwaitis, yet they have weathered previous storms. Will the country survive this?
It is difficult to say at this point. Because, as I've been saying, it has come under the domino effect of the Arab Spring there in that region. So the people of Kuwait have risen up, I think, and that the sentiments which they are expressing against the overall American policies in the region, against the dictatorial regime, which basically is working in the garb as a face-saving democracy there, which exactly is not a democracy. And a lot of newspapers and sites, websites, they talk about constitutional monarchy in Kuwait. It's not exactly a constitutional monarchy. It's kind of an absolute monarchy because all the state apparatus is controlled, and all the powers and authorities are concentrated in the hands of the Al-Sabah family. So the people are discontented with the foreign policy of Kuwait, with the domestic and economic policy of Kuwait, and the Al-Sabah family's corruption. So it's going exactly in the same direction as we have seen the Bahraini government and the Saudi government, with a little bit of difference that in this case of Kuwait, we have a kind of an elected parliament, of course, which has its own weight in domestic and political affairs there.
Right, so Mr. Wasif, you know, in context of the Arab Spring, how significant would unrest in Kuwait be for the likes of Yemen, Bahrain, and even Saudi Arabia?
Since it's a pretty tiny state, just like Bahrain, but its strategic location is very vital for the American interest in that region. It's at the corner of the Persian Gulf.
The international group Human Rights Without Frontiers, or HRWF, has demanded the European Union mount pressure on the Bahraini authorities to meet the protesters' objectives and to begin comprehensive reforms, which include building trust with the opposition and civil society to resume dialogue.
Following its first visit to Manama since the spark of popular protests in Bahrain, HRWF prepared a detailed 40-page report in Brussels titled The Future of Bahrain, Where To? The report comes as part of a comprehensive investigative study about the human rights violations and systematic quelling of popular protests by the Manama authorities. The international watchdog laid out several key demands based on 4 days of meetings between its director and all Bahraini groups.
The Bahraini government should take swift measures and begin political, social, economic, and human rights reforms. In doing so, it will send a strong positive message to the Bahraini people.
The organization also demanded the Bahraini government take measures to build trust with the opposition and civil society blocs, as well as protect the rights of activists during peaceful protests, arrests, detentions, and trials, in accordance with international human rights standards. The measures are part of a greater demand for the implementation of comprehensive reforms, which will help bridge the gap in Bahraini society. The organization also reached out to those it described as peacemakers among the trusted religious figures. The international watchdog submitted the report to the European Union due to, quote, the EU's influence on Manama.
The EU must closely monitor the situation as well as follow up on the international investigative report to be issued next week.
The EU, which enjoys close relations with the Bahraini regime as confirmed by the report, said it will continue to exert parallel efforts to mount pressure on the Bahraini government.
In conjunction with this report, the EU will maintain contact with the Bahraini authorities as well as mount pressure on them to end human rights violations.
In order to meet human rights standards in Bahrain, the report recommended training what it referred to as forces to uphold the law in cooperation with the EU and the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The international watchdog called on Bahrain to implement national reconciliation measures and endorse a new social order, marking an end to the regime's old practices, which, according to the report, have led to tragic internal division over the past years. The organization also called on the Bahraini regime, through the EU, to implement 18 urgent demands that can no longer be subject to delay or procrastination.
Salvaging Afghanistan's national interests that are in danger of collapse was the focus of discussions at the Afghan Assembly of Elders, known as a Loya Jirga, which began today in the capital, Kabul. President Hamid Karzai opened the assembly by reaffirming his country's desire for stability as soon as possible, despite his support for the U.S.'s installation of permanent military bases in Afghanistan.
Karzai set the conditions for building the bases, such as ending night raids by American troops, dismantling foreign institutions, and establishing parallel organizations in Afghanistan.
Our correspondent Samir Alawi attended the Loya Jirga assembly.
The Afghan government resorted to the Assembly of Elders, known in Afghanistan as Loya Jirga, to discuss the most crucial issue in the country today, the completion of its national sovereignty. However, President Hamid Karzai expressed his desire to reach a strategic agreement that outlines the future of Afghanistan's relationship with the United States after it withdraws its forces, including the installation of long-term American military bases in Afghanistan.
We're here to sign the strategic agreement with America because it meets the interests of Afghanistan. We will provide all conditions for it, but on the basis of complete stability in Afghanistan and no interference in our internal affairs. We know how to run our internal matters and how to arrange our own home.
The Taliban, which rejected Loya Jirga, warned the participants of the assembly of the consequences of losing legitimacy after allowing the installment of permanent American military bases. The Taliban said that doing so will prolong the war in Afghanistan, even after the foreign troops are forced to withdraw unconditionally.
We cannot describe this meeting as the National Loya Jirga. It is an American meeting. After the U.S. failed, it resorted to its dirty dogs to sign an agreement with them and deny the blood that martyrs have shed throughout the 10 years. Then the accomplices came to give it legitimacy for occupation.
Supporters of the long-term agreement with the United States justified their position by deterring neighboring countries from interfering in internal Afghan affairs. Meanwhile, the expanded security measures at the Loya Jirga meeting were considered an indicator that stability in Afghanistan depends more on an agreement with neighboring countries than faraway powers. Loya Jirga is expected to bring together two contradictory matters: national interest in the installation of permanent American military bases in Afghanistan. More importantly, many believe that this time the Loya Jirga assembly is illegitimate and overrides the principles of the Afghan constitution. Samir Alawi, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
And Hamas have reportedly agreed to hold elections next May in what would be a major step towards ending their 4-year rift. In the interim, the two sides have agreed to form a caretaker government, one that will, well, apparently not include Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Salam Fayyad. More in this report from IBA's Ellie Woggelanter.
In the first sign of progress since the signing of a unity pact in May of this year, Fatah and Hamas have agreed to hold elections in May 2012. A temporary government comprised of non-political technocrats is expected to be named now to serve until a permanent slate is selected in the election. The key to the deal is the apparent willingness of Prime Minister Salam Fayyad to step aside. Hamas has been adamant in insisting that Fayyad must go, charging that he is a pawn of the Western governments and too close to Israel. At the same time, the U.S.-educated economist is widely respected in the West and is key to ensuring the flow of international aid. That quandary has many asking whether the removal of Fayyad would be short-sighted. It might solve the Fatah-Hamas logjam, but cost hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid. The plan is to be approved at a meeting in Cairo between Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas leader Khalid Mashal on November 25th. Abbas is expected to make it official later today in a public address marking 7 years since Yasser Arafat's death and timed to coincide with the 23rd anniversary of the Palestinian Declaration of Independence made by Arafat in Algiers on November 15, 1988. Meanwhile, on the West Bank yesterday, 6 Palestinian activists, clutching national flags and surrounded by dozens of reporters, were dragged off the number 148 Egged bus that stopped by Kochav Yaakov Junction on Route 60 after a standoff with police. The Palestinians boarded the Israeli bus in a widely advertised action, hoping to draw attention to what they call discriminatory measures in the West Bank, particularly travel restrictions. 6 were detained and then released a few hours later in the West Bank. Palestinian activists dubbed themselves Freedom Riders after 1960s American civil rights activists who worked in the South to counter racial discrimination and segregation there, though there were no security elements in the American rights struggle. Ellie Woggelanter, IBA News.
The French Foreign Ministry has confirmed that the French envoy to the Gaza Strip was injured in Sunday's Israeli Air Force strike on a terror cell. The diplomat, his wife, and 13-year-old daughter were hit by shrapnel at their residence in Gaza, which is located some 200 meters from the site of the IAF attack. A spokesman for the French ministry said that France deplores the outcome of this strike. He also said that while France is committed to Israel's security, it is necessary for all parties to avoid civilian harm. In response, Foreign Ministry spokesman Yigal Palmor said that Israel targeted a Hamas cell responsible for shooting rockets at Israeli civilians. He added that the French response was completely disproportionate.
Defence ministers from a number of East African countries and the Horn of Africa region are expected to meet at the African Union headquarters to discuss ways to restore stability in Somalia and support the African Union peacekeeping troops. The following report by Soufiane Tassira is read by Fatima Zahra bin Safi.
In the last few months, the Somali capital Mogadishu saw the withdrawal of the al-Shabaab movement, which is categorized as a terrorist group, from its suburbs. Stability has somewhat returned to a region that has been living its modern history in constant wars and crises. This stability would not have been achieved without help from over 9,000 African Union peacekeeping troops, which managed to support and protect the legitimate government of Somalia. The stability of Somalia is an issue that not only concerns the Horn of Africa, but is also the key focus of the African Union. Therefore, defense ministers from Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti are meeting at the African Union headquarters to support the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, by sending 1,700 additional peacekeeping troops to the region. 4 years have passed since the African Union peacekeeping troops mission in Somalia began in 2007 amid a civil war that lasted for decades. The civil war even affected ship transport worldwide. Hundreds of ships and vessels were detained and confiscated, and their crew members either had to pay a ransom or die. AMISOM's troop support will provide security to Somalia, which will consequently secure the Horn of Africa and the region west of the Indian Ocean.
In the Horn of Africa region, specifically Somalia, children are still suffering from famine despite the aid provided from a number of organizations around the world. Hadia Sultan reports.
They escaped from the brutal famine and unstable situation in various regions of Somalia to these refugee camps in Mogadishu. For these children, deprivation and suffering are still the theme of their daily life, which is also filled with danger. The lack of health and social security is apparent in their conditions. Despite some humanitarian aid, these children still face tough challenges beyond imagination.
Before we came here, things were extremely difficult. I suffered from a lot of problems.
UNICEF is trying to exert more efforts to provide a decent life for this group of people. It set up a number of special camps for children in order to provide space for playing games.
What we're doing here is providing a kind of social and psychological support for children in order to ease their pain.
As security is gradually restored to the region due to the efforts by the African Union peacekeeping troops, this innocent Somali girl looks forward to a bright tomorrow free of tragedy and war.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.